Hello, everyone. My name is Sam Holtzman. I'll be with you for the next hour in our ongoing series of webinars on topics of the day. And today's session is what I'm referring to as addressing what should be your highest security concern, which is actually coding. May sound like a bit of a strange phrase or topic, but hopefully as we spend the next hour together, you'll see why I believe that this is a massive concern that really needs to be addressed rather than what we see going on, frankly, which is this, finger pointing. Finger pointing is great, but that doesn't mean anything's going to be addressed. So let's get started, and we hope that you do receive some benefit of this webinar. It is being recorded, so if some of your colleagues are interested in getting an understanding of this area, we'll have that link available for you. And so I want to start off with a little bit of an understanding of what the issues are. Let's start off with Home Depot. And these are public-facing data breaches over the past few years. Home Depot, 2014, 53 million, they believe, identified data breaches. Sony, 77 million data breaches going back to 2011. Anthem Blue Cross Blue Shield, 80 million data breaches, 2015. Chase Bank, 83 million data breaches, 2013. AOL, 92 million data breaches dating back to 2007. As you're seeing, this is not a problem that occurred yesterday. LinkedIn, fascinating set of numbers. One report from LinkedIn said 100 million of their LinkedIn people were essentially breached the data. Another report they said is 167 million. Fascinating that they don't even know the number of breaches that have occurred. Just think about that for a moment. So all these numbers are, as we're seeing, guessing. Target, 110 million data breaches in 2013. eBay, 145 million data breaches in 2014. MySpace, 360 million data breaches in 2016. Or another number they reported is 427 million data breaches in MySpace. Once again, don't know even how many data breaches they were. And finally, Yahoo. Of course, this is the recent one where a half a billion breaches occurred. And what we're hearing now is that it was reported this year, but it may go back to 2014. Over 2 years, this situation may be there. Now, some of you may be saying, Sam, this is great numbers, I understand all this, but you just don't get it. This is because we're using legacy techniques, those old things that are out there. We weren't concerned about security. We weren't using agile programming techniques. We weren't using the cloud. We weren't using all this new stuff that's out there, J2EE, Java, Ruby on Rails, all this other stuff. You just don't get it, okay? Well, that may be a belief, but how about this one? Chinese hackers hack a car from 12 miles away, of course. This is the Tesla breach that's there. Again, finger pointing. And as you can see here, it's not about the technology that's being used, it's something else. And we're going to suggest to you it's coding. Now, in this situation, to me, this is even more scary because on further investigation, it was determined that they were using, and the new term out there, by the way, ladies and gentlemen, the term is vulnerabilities. It's not bugs, it's not errors anymore. It's now called vulnerabilities. Well, you know what I call it? Bad programming, bad systems development methodologies. This is what we should be calling it, because that's really what we're talking about. And the open source framework that we're using had essentially a flaw in it, a vulnerability as it's being called by Tesla, and they went in and, quote, patched that, whatever that means. And then they found another one in the Linux kernel, and they went in there and, quote, patched that. It doesn't mean they've patched all the vulnerabilities. It says that they've patched the vulnerability that they found. I'm not here to startle anyone. I'm not here to get anybody angry. What I'm here to do is to make sure that people open up their eyes as to what is actually going on out there. Once again, it's not finger pointing, it's figuring out what the root cause is. And one of the things we can understand is here's the situation right now. Let's look a bit closer to home. This one really hit home with me. A gentleman named Jerome Radcliffe. Probably don't know who this gentleman is. He is a diabetic patient with an insulin pump. Happens to be in the technology business. On August 4th, 2011, at the Black Hat Conference, he reported that he reversed engineered his insulin pump, specifically in the communications protocol, because there was something in the back of his mind that was bothering him as to what he saw. And he demonstrated the vulnerabilities that would allow unauthorized access to his insulin pump through wireless channels. October 11th, at the Hacker Halted Conference, Barnaby Jack, who is was a renowned hacker, unfortunately he passed away, exposed the security vulnerability to commandeer remotely the insulin pump by a radio frequency. This is getting close to home now. We're not talking about some hack that's going on a website. This is about people's health. Again, Barnaby Jack, an infamous or famous hacker that's out there, went even further. In October 17th of 2012, he showed a pacemaker hack. My goodness, where he was able to deliver an unwarranted shock through a pacemaker via wireless transmission. This is not about pointing fingers. This is about figuring out the basic vulnerability or the errors, as I call them, bad software that we're actually looking at. This is getting closer and closer to home, as you can see here. Let's look a little further. What is actually the issue? Well, this is the issue. All we need to build software is a high level of understanding, a high level of detail. If we look at that phrase, frankly, the phrase itself doesn't even make any sense. What is a high level of detail versus a detail level of detail? I don't even know what it means, that's there. But what does this translate into when we're all done? Something like this. Now, this happens to be essentially the rail transport system for another country. It's not in the United States. You can see all these links here and all these organizations that are going on. Each one of them have a software development approach. Each one of them have essentially updates that are going on. In all these connections and things like that in an uncontrolled environment. The reason we believe it's like that is because what you'll see in just a little bit is we believe that our industry is in maturity level 1 of developing software with 3 essentially identified, in our opinion, levels of maturity. Most of our organizations are in maturity level 1. Or we see something like this. We have the, quote, user on the left-hand side, and we have essentially a series of data structures and databases, and we can see that this is all convoluted, so the end state vision looks something like this. Are there any questions about this diagram? Of course, what I'm trying to do here is to bring a little bit of humor into our understanding, because obviously this is a very serious topic. Or how about this? Let's say that we're thinking about developing a new healthcare system for a large country that happens to be called the United States. So all we need essentially is this level of understanding, because we sort of know about healthcare. Everybody knows about healthcare. We got all these experts out there about healthcare. All we got to do is mechanize it. And all we need to do is bring some vendors together. And of course, we're going to pick the vendors that have CMMI level 5 maturity in coding to make sure that the code is really good stuff. We don't have to worry about it. And of course, this high-level drawing translates into a little bit more detail that looks something like this. Now, how did we get to that from previous drawing to this one? That's a great question. A miracle occurred. I'm not trying to suggest that the healthcare.gov site is the only issue out there, but we can see with all of these interconnectivities and all of these organizations involved and all of this understanding that you can see the lack of discipline, frankly, as to what is going on. You know something? You can't take 100 log cabins and stack them on top of each other to get a 100-story building. This is what we have to recognize. For building a 100-story building, we really have to recognize that it's a 100-story building. And the techniques to build a 100-story building are radically different than building a log cabin. Why can't we take 1,000 copies of Quicken and install them in our enterprise and have an integrated financial system? Same type of situation. It's not about scalability. It's a different thing. It's a different thing. Of course, the end product tends to look something like this. I know some of you probably watched the political debates yesterday. This is not a picture of Mr. Trump's hair. This is an actual diagram of the complexities of one organization's interconnections in their systems environment. And of course, we can see here, that's the issue that's there. Notice that I'm pointing at it. My finger is so big I can't even point as to what is going on here. Of course, everything has to fit on a PowerPoint slide, and we can see here that we understand what's going on. Now, if we add color to that picture and bring some structure to it, obviously it clears things up. That's the same picture with another set of understandings that are there according to this particular organization. Guess what? Same situation. We have to understand that there's two sets of representations that are needed in the software world. Those that are human consumable and those that are compiler consumable, and there has to be a traceable and transparent path from the human understanding to essentially the software. If there is anything broken in the chain, there's going to be a problem. So of course, what we can do here is have just a whiteboard understanding and throw some swim lanes at this, and that'll clear things up. And of course, well, now we can use essentially the technology views that some of you are more used to understand what is going on. I'm not here to critique, once again, any of these representations you're seeing. What I'm here to do is to say, what are we actually trying to do? And how do any of these things add to that understanding? That's the question. That's the question. What we're trying to do is to minimize the entropy that occurs between the customer and the end product, as we call it. And so we have essentially another type of diagram that shows all the technology interfaces. Let's take a look at this for a moment. Well, we have to recognize that every one of these rectangles or boxes, whatever you want to call them, has a software development process, code changes, and using the contemporary phrase, vulnerabilities. One vulnerability in one of these can affect this whole area. And as we all know, it's uncontrolled. There is no control point at all. Now this ends up to something that looks as clean as this. Please remember the end product. So what I'm suggesting here is the whole world of information systems, data processing, we want to call it, is really at an early stage. And it is an early stage because, frankly, it's only 40 years old. We've been building large, complex engineering products since the pyramids in Egypt were constructed. Building IT systems, 40 years or so, is a relatively short understanding as to what is going on. Any questions about this? Well, of course there are. Now, what we're showing you here is a little bit of a real-life understanding as to what we're facing. Please remember the topic here is about coding. It's about understanding that, in our opinion, is the issue. Well, how do we address this, and what does this have to do essentially with IT? Well, one of the things that you and I have to recognize is that we are moving from the industrial age to the information age, or the knowledge age, or the wisdom age, whatever we want to call it. And what we have to recognize is that movement is essentially something that's going on right now. We are essentially in this changing environment that's here. We're moving from the industrial age to the information age. If we talk to the human behavioralists for a moment, they also tell us that that change takes 40 years, 40. And they tell us that that is essentially a probable minimum time, and they think we're about halfway through this transition. Now that has to do with tools, techniques, process, methods, work breakdown structures, roles, responsibilities, skills. There's a whole set of things that are going on within this transition. And it is tough. It is really tough. This particular transition versus the transitions that we've seen in the past, from the nomadic to the agrarian agriculture age, mercantile to industrial, were more about human strength augmentation. As we're moving into the knowledge age, it's brain cell augmentation. It's a whole different environment. It's not human strength that's making a difference, or the machines that augment human strength. It's the understanding, it's the human skills, it's the brain cells, it's the intelligence that is going to make the difference. And this is a huge difference compared to what it was in the past ages. Some of you have seen in my biography that I live in southeastern Michigan, the Detroit area. Anybody remember Detroit? They used to make a lot of cars. The whole base of the city was based on the industrial age understanding. So we're going through a transition in a lot of different areas. And one of the most common ways to address this is to essentially write a book. And in the olden days, a few years ago, you used to go on Oprah Winfrey, and she used to essentially talk about your book and you'd become an instant star. Of course, Oprah Winfrey is no longer the key individual on television. It's now Ellen DeGeneres. You go on to her show, and all you have to do is write a book on the cyber economy or the information economy, and everybody applauds, and everybody gets a copy of the book, and nothing happens. Well, guess what? It's more than writing a book, and it's more than the cosmetology that we've been talking about. On page 35, I'm going to give you a little bit of example of what you and I are facing as we're moving into the information age in its infancy of 40+ years. And all I'm going to do here during this session here to essentially move through this slide is to talk about the industrial age and the knowledge age and show you essentially the parallels that are going on. In the industrial age, the dominant technology was the machine. In the information or knowledge age, the dominant technology is the computer. Fascinating analogy, as you'll see here in just a moment. In the beginning of the industrial age, you had this massive engine that was essentially powering the whole industrial complex, the plant or the assembly plant or the manufacturing facility. This massive engine, it was using either oil or steam or coal to essentially fire up and generate additional energy, and that was attached to various components within the factory. They had these leather belts that had these stations and essentially had these massive control systems that were going on. And essentially what you had was the limits of the technology in the beginning was essentially the power drain that was going on as these transfers were going from machine to machine. But what's fascinating is, let's throw some mathematics at it. That translated into an equation that said there's a one-to-many relationship between the engine and how it's done, the work that's being performed. Let's fast forward for a moment in the industrial age to the invention of the electric motor. Radically changed the environment, because now you can move the power closer to the worker. And now you can essentially have factories that are football fields long and also three-dimensional. You could have multi-story things and things like that. What did that do, though, to the mathematics? Radically changed the mathematical and complexity in the environment. A one-to-many relationship is now a many-to-many relationship, m times n, vastly increase productivity. And in the industrial age, the engineers at the time developed this concept of workflow to essentially bring some mathematical rigor to understanding how you actually put these things in an assembly plant. let's go just for a moment into the information age. I'm just going to spend a lot of time on this one to give you the parallels, that we are not something that is just invented out of the blue, and there's no history here that we could possibly use to make our transition a little bit easier. Let's talk about the beginning of the information age, or the data age, or the knowledge age, or the wisdom age, what I want to call it, data processing. I'm going to skip, of course, a few generations. Let's start with the mainframe. Anybody remember the mainframe? This big machine, the big engine. And we had these little wires that were attached to that big engine, attached to us. And what was sitting in front of us was a faded green screen with a clickety-clickety keyboard, if any of you remember, IBM 3270 screens. And we were attached to that, a one-to-many relationship. That's the thing I'm trying to mention to you. Now, somebody said, hey, I got this great idea. Nobody in the universe has ever thought about it before. Why don't we take that engine and break it down into smaller pieces, distribute them closer to the worker? We'll be all set. That's all we got to do. All you got to do is to make these machines smaller, put them next to the human being, and you're going to be all set. Remember the complexity. All of a sudden, we have an M times N relationship. And of course, that spawned what you and I are using right now, the internet. You know what the problem was? You know what the problem is? The internet wasn't engineered. It just evolved, pushed together by little pieces with unstructured understanding of what was going on, no cause and effect understanding, no overall understanding of the architecture or the implementation or the what-if analysis or the risk analysis that was going on, because there was no frame of reference. It just evolved. It just happened. Once again, what we suggest is maturity level 1. The icons, the gasoline engine. The icon is the microprocessor. The science is mechanical engineering. The science is computer science. Well, when I was going to university, the computer science was building computers. What scares me today is that most computer science curriculums talk about coding, not architecture, not design, but coding. This is the danger. You can see where we are essentially in the maturing process. The output is mass consumer goods. The output is knowledge. One of my favorite words out there, totally out of context. What is knowledge in the context of an enterprise? Put it in my hand. Is it measured by dollars, pounds, ounces, fortnights per furlong? We have all these understandings. No, we have no understanding. But we have conferences, we have meetings, we have magazines, we have job titles. It really shows, unfortunately, the lack of maturity that we have. Energy source, fossil fuels. Energy source, the mind. I'm just going to go down to 7-Eleven and get some mind units. We're all set here. This is the big issue that we're facing. How do we gear up to this new brain cell requirement that's up there? Bases of wealth, land, labor, and capital. Bases of wealth, information. And we have someone to thank to get the public understanding of the worth of information. And this just occurred a few months back. Now, who do we need to thank to get people to recognize the worth of information? None other than a young lady named Taylor Swift. Well, she's not an IT person. That's correct. Remember a few, maybe it's more than 6 months ago, when Apple Computer decided to launch their new music service, and they decided to, quote, give away the service. Of course, it's not the service, it's the music for 90 days. Ms. Swift wrote a nice little note to Mr. Iger, who's the chairman of Disney, and said, ain't gonna happen, sir. You got to recognize that this is our intellectual capital. And of course, she said, as she said in her note, I'm not only protecting myself, but I'm protecting those people that are the one-hit wonders that have one song for a month or so trying to make a living on this thing. Now, the power of Ms. Swift was the next day, that paradigm was changed. Now, you and I will start recognizing one day that our information is as valuable, whether it's our social security number, whether it's our date of birth, whether it's who our contacts are, whether it's who we're looking at on the internet. All of these things that are out there in, quote, the free world, we're going to start recognizing is essentially our land, labor, and capital. We are in the information age. It's a different currency. What makes a difference? Economies of scale. What makes a difference? Intelligence. This is going to be the new metric. I don't know exactly what it's going to be. We're going from a laborer to the knowledge worker. What are we doing? We're automating. What are we doing in the information age, in the knowledge age? We're informing. How do you measure that? The number of PowerPoint slides we change a day? Don't know yet. We're just beginning to understand this. Organizational form, the hierarchical enterprise. You and I, if you're in a large organization, are under the guise of a structure that's called command and control that was developed by an ancient Chinese warrior by the name of Sun Tzu. Thousands of years ago is when this structure was there. If you want to read something fascinating, Sun Tzu and the Art of War, it's been translated many, many times. It's almost the rigor, the Bible in the military. But it talks about building essentially this command and control structure that's there. Well, now we're in a different set of understandings. We have essentially what we refer to as a collaborate and communicate structure versus a command and control structure. Command and control, collaborate and communicate. Very different structure. If I may be so bold as suggest, the reason that Mr. Snowden was able to abscond with, that's a harsh term, the information that's out there, was because the industry and the military did not recognize that top-down passwords isn't going to help. Two-factor authentication isn't going to help. Yeah, but maybe six-factor authentication. It doesn't matter. It's a different environment. It's recognizing that a structure that was good in the industrial age may have to be revisited in the information age. Means logistics, plane, trains, and automobiles. Means logistics, greatest movie in the world. Network, and finally, where's our marketplace, shopping malls, and cyberspace. Various things. Well, what can we learn about this? We can learn that we're in this concept of change. This is a massive change issue that we're facing. And if we can just for a moment believe that information systems and enterprises have some relationship to 7,000 years of history, not exactly, we can possibly learn a bunch of things from those other worlds that are out there. And essentially the difference now is, how do we address continuous change? We have to recognize that change is the norm. It's not Tuesdays and Thursdays or Monday, Wednesday, and Fridays or monthly releases. That's an industrial age concept. This is an information age concept where we cannot predetermine precisely everything that's going on. Let me make an offer to any one of the people that are online. If any of you can predict with 100% certainty the stock price of any stock 5 seconds from now, I'll take you all to Tahiti. Well, of course, we can't do that. We have to recognize that whether it's use cases or business process modeling notation or scenario plans or all these other things that we've been trying to conjure up that are industrial age concepts, it's different. We can't predict things. And we have to build an environment that understands that change is continuous. There is no such thing as, quote, releases. Release becomes legacy the minute it is released. It doesn't matter if we do it agilely or waterfally. As soon as we build something, it's legacy that's there. Well, it turns out that we can possibly learn some things here from the physical world. Now, quickly, in the physical world, we can look at it a little bit easier, but as I'll show you in just a moment, we see the same thing in our world in information systems. We were kind of surprised a number of years back that we found out there's only 3 ways to change something. We were flabbergasted. We thought there'd be a billion. Some of them may sound a little bit comical, and all of these are things that you and I, frankly, do all the time. What's the first approach to change? Go for it and see what happens. And this is something that we all do. And unfortunately, if we don't have a baseline frame of reference as to what's going on, which aren't those complex diagrams that are totally not understandable, and it's not because you can't find the source code, it's figuring out what all the what-if analyses are going to be. And so what do? We go for it. What did Tesla, frankly, do when they went in there and fixed Linux? Did they fix it? No. They found a vulnerability. They said, well, we don't know how this all is going on here. It's open source. Other people are looking at it. I don't know exactly what's going on. By the way, it's not just open source software. It doesn't matter if you pay $100 million or $500 million for the software or 29 cents. It's built essentially on level 1 maturity, as we'll see in just a moment. High risk, low reliability, change by trial and error. But we all know that it is something that we do all the time. What's the second approach to change? Throw it away and start all over again. What? We can't throw this thing away. We just built it 2 days ago. It wasn't built for change is the question we have to think about. Or was it built for change? And if so, what does that really mean? Well, hopefully we'll show you here. Throw it away? Are you kidding me? No, I can't do that. Well, in the physical world, we figured out that useful lives of some things are exhausted. Sometimes we have to change it. We have to scrap it. Or we hear essentially, don't change it. You know, John built that software. You could see the convoluted logic that he used. It was just unbelievable. So what we're going to do is to encapsulate the code because we don't know exactly what's going on there. Now, what's the third level of understanding change? Reverse engineer and change it. Please notice that I had to put the word reverse in quotes because you can't reverse engineer something unless it was engineered in the first place. You can't reverse engineer something if it wasn't engineered in the first place. And I'm going to humbly suggest that we're not doing much, quote, engineering. We're doing manufacturing, or another word for that is implementation. Let's get the code out the door faster and faster and faster. That's really the objective, which once again is a maturity level 1 thought process, as we'll see. Reverse engineer, if we could do it, suggests that we recreate or find the drawings, change the drawings, and then change the physical object. You recreate or find the drawings, change the drawings, and change the physical object. If you are documenting, it occurs after the change is made. What we're looking for is ways to understand the effect of change before the change is made. Architecture is not what we're talking about, documentation is not what we're talking about here. It's something else we'll refer to as architecture, as you'll see in just a moment. So the question for you and I is, how do you change a building? Well, very carefully. Why don't we go ask those people? That's a good idea. You know, they'll talk to you. How do you change an airplane? Very carefully. And I'm really happy, since I fly so much, that there is a very disciplined process when an airplane is changed, because it's hard for an airplane to pull over the side of the road and hit Control-Alt-Delete. It really is difficult. It's there. And I'm very happy that they use some techniques there that are very tried and true, and we can do the same thing. Or how do you change a PC? Well, if it's the company's PC, we go for it and see what happens. If it's our PC, it's a whole different concept, you know, that's there. And how do you change a system? I'm going to suggest to you, you have option 1 and 2. And what's more important to all of us is how do you change the business? How do you change the enterprise? Because you and I, moving into the information age right now, are really the change agents for the enterprise. You can call yourself whatever you're calling yourself, but we are actually the change agents. We're moving the organization from the industrial age. We are the enabler. We are the enabler of the organization moving from the industrial age to the information age. Well, if we continue looking out there, outside of IT, and you don't see this in computer world, you don't see this in Information Week, you don't see this in Dr. Dobbs' journal, you don't see this in whatever publication you're looking at, you got to look outside at the matured areas and see if we can borrow some things. And boy, if we go out there and look at it, it is really startling. Because the people in the physical world weren't sitting back and saying, well, we don't know how to make things, change things faster. We'll just, I don't know what we're going to do. No, they've studied this thing. And it turns up they came up with this concept called the general manufacturing maturity phases. And there's a manufacturing maturity model. We can follow that same thing once you see where we're positioned. The first level of maturity is called make to order. And we're going to suggest to you that if you use the word requirements, definitions, and specifications, and use cases, and things like that, we're at maturity level 1. Please recognize, I hope, that I'm positioning these techniques that are there. Now let's look in the physical world for a moment. Henry Ford, 150 years ago. Go into his office and say, Hank, build me a horseless carriage. And he'd say, no problem. Come back to me in 6 months, I'll have a horseless carriage for you. And he'd call his buddy Harvey Firestone. Couldn't call his buddy Harvey because there was no telephones yet. He'd telegraph his buddy Harvey and say, hey, Harvey, I need 4 tires. And Harvey would go out to the rainforest to chop down some rubber trees. I'm just exaggerating a little bit. He'd melt that stuff down, put it in a mold, get the tires all set, and send it to Dearborn, Michigan. Off you go. Make to order, literally make to order, starting with essentially almost a blank sheet of paper or a blank sheet of paper and moving forward. It's there. Long lead times, high costs, generally low reliability. And if we look at them in the mirror for just a moment, I believe most of us are there. Positioning of where we are is the first recognition that we think is important. Where are we? What's maturity level 2? Provide from stock. What was Henry Ford's famous phrase? You can have any color of car that you want as long as it's black. Now, what is provide from stock in our universe? Commercial off-the-shelf packages, COTS packages. That's where we are. Please notice, maturity level 2. Now, what you and I have to recognize is, let's say, hypothetically, that package doesn't fit our needs exactly. Okay, so we're just going to make some tweaks to this thing. Not many, just a few. I'm sure it won't affect a thing. What just happened is that we now have increased, let me repeat, increased the complexity in the organization. Because now we have the commercial off-the-shelf package software and its interfaces, our custom software and its development process and its changes and its interfaces. We have increased the complexity in the organization. I didn't say don't do it. I'm saying let's open our eyes to figure out what actually is going on. And that's what's happening here. We have to recognize that we're not at the maturity that we need to be in the information age world. Provide from stock has some value. Reduce cost, higher reliability, limited flexibility. Maturity level 3 is what we have to get to. And that is called assemble to order. And you and I are surrounded by this in our daily lives. Most of what we see is assemble to order. People have told us that when we've lectured on this topic that the, quote, best analogy we can give people, whatever best means, is a salad bar. Picture a salad bar for a moment. You have the romaine lettuce, you have the green beans, you have the carrots, you have the tomatoes, you have the green peppers, you have all of these individual elements on the salad bar. How many salads can you make? Different combinations. Well, Carl Sagan gave us the number. Billions and billions assemble to order. That is the key to flexibility, agility, and security. We have ingredients that are separated and assembled at the time they're needed. We don't keep going back and saying, okay, the first thing we need to do is to plant some seeds, to raise the lettuce. We harvest the lettuce, we clean it off, we make sure it's okay, and we stick it in a bucket. Assemble to order is the key to this, from essentially an environment that is clean, whatever that word clean means in our industry in comparison to the industry that's there. Walk into Home Depot, assemble to order. They figured out in their domain what the independent variables are that allow you and I to assemble to order. 2x4s, windows, doors, and all of those components have a, quote, goodness to them. I'm using the word goodness in the physical world to relate to security. They are a product that has been tested, but they're at the component level to make sure that that is the cleanest thing that they can use. Go into a grocery store, the dairy section, the freezer section, the staple ingredients section. Go into a clothing store. You have the men's department. You got the women's department. Go into the men's department. You've got the fancy suits and ties. You've got the casual wear. Assemble to order. It's all around us, ladies and gentlemen. And that's the way we can function. But those industries have been around for more than 40 years. And the key phrase is an almost custom product. High reuse, reduced time to market, and mass customization in quantities of one. In quantities of one. That's what we're looking for. Now, how do we do this in enterprise and enterprise systems? How do we do this? This is the enterprise question. Well, this is one way to do this. Why don't we keep doing the same things over again and expect change? We're just going to code faster, code faster, code faster, code faster, code faster. By the way, code faster. That's the answer. Oh, we're going to bring in the users and help them, and it's all going to be maturing. This is insanity. Excuse my emotions. We really got to think about this a different way. It's not about the code. It's about assembling to order. The more code we write, ladies and gentlemen, with all due respect, again, the more vulnerabilities we have, the more chances of hacking increasing. Testing does not tell you that a product is good. Testing says these tests have passed. Scenario plans doesn't tell you that scenarios, we have all the scenarios. It says these 11-7 scenarios we've looked at. These are all industrial age concepts. Banging your head against a wall does have a benefit, and that's going to burn up essentially 150 calories. It may cause some other effects that are not as good, but it does have some benefits that are there. This is what we want, assemble to order. And we have to figure out how to do this. Again, it's all around us. It's all around us. Now, how do we get there? Well, it takes some maturity. Let's look at the automobile business. This was the first assemble to order approach, a kind of a slow and antiquated process, to say the least. But they were figuring out that there was a repetitive process that allowed them to produce variations. This isn't one, you can have any color carve as long as it's black. They're essentially assembling to order from basic elements that are there that have been tried and true, made sure that they have the highest quality and essentially allow fit and finish to be perfect. That process matured a little bit to look something like this. You could now aid the individual, the human being, a little bit more to make the assembly process easier from, once again, configured items in their particular industry, which essentially led to something that looks like this. And unfortunately, when you see this picture, there aren't too many people in it. And it's not the people that's the issue, but what you can do here is amazingly build massive numbers of variations from a small set of elements that are there. Just think about the salad bar. How many different salad combinations can you make if you have 16 elements in the salad bar? It's astounding. Well, in order for us to do this, it's going to take a phased transition. We can't do this all at once to get into this environment, to actually really have a secured environment that's there. The first thing we need to do is to stop the madness. We have to stop the madness. We have to sort of say, on Monday morning, we are going to isolate the legacy. Isolate the legacy. It's not going to disappear at once. We know that. You got to be a little patient. As a matter of fact, you may have to be a lot of patient to be there. It's not going to happen overnight. It didn't happen overnight in the automobile business. It didn't happen overnight in any of these businesses that we're talking about. What we have to do is to isolate the legacy and try to make sure that we don't disturb it, but we can possibly use it. And the concepts that we refer to is enabling an assemble-to-order environment. And the way we can do that is by setting up PACs and DACs. A PAC is a process assembly center, and a DAC is a data assembly center. It's essentially the salad bars that you and I need in our profession. Now, I know that the contemporary phrase for our profession is information technology, but what we actually are doing is what? We are processing data. Processing data. In the olden days, we used to be called data processing. Same type of situation that's there. Now, what are these PACs and DACs? They are essentially going to be the building blocks, the elements that have the highest level of integrity through proper software development methods that have nothing to do with implementation. It has to do with proper software development methods. And once we have the element in place, the security and vulnerabilities go down. I can't say zero because this is still something that we're going to look at. We don't know yet, but we have seen this pattern for hundreds and hundreds of years where if we have assemble to order, all of these vulnerabilities go way down. But the software profession, please remember, is still in phase one. But we are seeing levels in organizations today that are doing this. This is not fiction. This is something that you can do. And one of the ways that we can approach this is essentially take the legacy environment out there and frankly try to save some of it. Is there a way that we can start extracting things out of these environments? There may or may not be. Now let me give you a physical example here of why I say may or may not be. Let's say that you have a jar of spaghetti sauce. Sam, what are you talking about? Let's say for a moment you have a jar of spaghetti sauce. One would hope that in that jar of spaghetti sauce, there's at least one tomato that's in there. Now here's the problem. It wasn't made to be extracted. If somebody says to you tomorrow, oh, by the way, we've changed our mind, we don't want the tomato sauce anymore. We actually want you to take the tomato out of there because what we want to do is to reverse engineer it into its original intent, and we want to slice that tomato up because we want to use it on a salad. Now, here's what you're going to say. Are you crazy? We can see in the physical world how difficult that is. It's not impossible. There are miracles every once in a while, but I don't think that's going to occur. Yet we believe that software, notice how gentle that sounds. We can sit around the table singing Kumbaya and drinking Cabernet. Software has a different tendency. No, if it wasn't engineered to be extracted, it's not going to happen. But there is a possibility that there are things that we can do to use the legacy that's there. If not, what we need to do is to essentially, again, isolate that legacy from the new environment. If we keep pointing back to the legacy, we'll never get out of this situation. It just won't happen. So we have to recognize the limitations as to what is going on there. Now, once we have this particular environment, we can essentially now look forward to build a new assemble-to-order secure environment from the PAC and the DAC. And then we need, on top of that, a system development methodology or solution development methodology, whatever you'd like to call it, that looks something like this. You architect, you analyze, you design, and you assemble. You do not construct or use a phrase like that or code. It's architect, analyze, design, assemble. And the elements in the pack are essentially what we refer to as unique elements in the environment that is there. This is the way we see moving essentially into the environment. Now, the benefits of this are not only security, but what we would consider to be, using a term that's used quite a bit right now, a true agile environment. It allows you and I to react to customer demands by assembling to order, because they cannot. It doesn't matter if we force them to sign in blood on a series of documents. They can't predict what is required tomorrow. We have to recognize that as we move forward. In order to continuously meet customer demand, what we actually have to think about is mass customization in quantities of one. Mass customization in quantities of one. What an ideal situation. You and I need to think about this concept of a salad bar. We can do it through the concept of a pack and a deck. It's assembling to order. It may look exactly like this or may look similar. And what we're going to suggest to you as we're maturing from level 1, 2, and 3 in the software business, that the suppliers that you and I work with today in the software industry will essentially start supplying these individual elements under a frame of reference that is consistent. There still has to be a series of, I have to whisper this word, standards that's out there to make sure that all of this is in place. Make it your way. With all due respect to our friends at one of the fast food companies, make it your way from clean and safe ingredients is what we're talking about. Or we could have it their way, which is really something that is kind of distasteful, to say the least, that's there. So what we're looking for is a secure enterprise agility from assemble to order environment. The key is enterprise agility with a secured environment. We forgot that phrase early on. It's not how fast we get the code out the door. It's making sure the code out the door meets the requirements of the customer and is secure. And all these practices we're talking about can be accelerated if we stop writing code and start assembling from elements, not from composites, elements that are out there once we have them in place. Our salad bar needs to consist of the individual elements. Don't stick the lettuce and the tomatoes in the same bucket. That's a composite. Somebody may want the tomatoes, somebody may not want the tomatoes. It's figuring out in our domain what the individual elements are. And that's not hard to do when you start thinking about it. It really goes back to software development processes and techniques that have been around for about 3 decades that are there. So, in closing out our session today, I need to ask you a question that is a rhetorical question. If not assembled to order from a secure environment that has a process and a data component, what is your approach to address essentially the things that we're seeing in the information age? Because the consequences are now beginning to become real. And what scares me more than anything else is the attorneys. The attorneys. If we look outside of information systems for a moment, the medical community, the accounting community, the 100-story building community, et cetera, they were forced to get their act together because of lawsuits, financial penalties, and jail time. Some of those industries haven't figured this out yet. They're still trying to get away with things, as we all know. But it's that third party set of attorneys that are making this happen out there outside of the world of IT. I'm going to suggest to you that we need to get our same act together with this secure environment that we're talking about here, or else they, in quotes, are going to come after us the same way, because we really need to move from maturity level 1 through maturity level 2 to maturity level 3, which is essentially assemble to order from secured components that we'd be developing. Or we can continue doing this. And it really hurts. It really does hurt. Thank you for your attention. We really appreciate it today. If you have any questions or comments, we'd be more than happy to speak with you on this. Here's my email. Again, this session has been recorded. If any of your colleagues want to hear about this, we'd be more than happy to send them the recordings that are there. And again, thank you for your attention. We have essentially webinars every 6 weeks or so on various topics. We hope you found this one interesting to you, and hopefully you can take away something in your own environment. I want to stress here, this is not going to happen in an hour, but it can happen pretty quickly. Again, thank you for your time. Have a rest of a great day, and we hope that we'll hear from some of you on this very, very important topic. Good day.